I'd like to give a big thanks to today's webinar sponsor, Strategex. Without them, this webinar would not be possible. Strategex is an 80-20 management consultancy with strong roots in manufacturing that consistently delivers measurable ROI. Strategex will be sharing the basics of 80-20 methodology, how to apply 80-20 to critical processes across a manufacturing organization, and key KPIs to measure 80-20 efficacy. Today, you'll hear from David Philippi, CEO at Strategex, and Carmelle Giblin, Vice President at Strategex. David and Carmelle, over to you, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to MAPI for arranging this, and thank you all for taking your time to learn more about 80-20. I'm still seeing the polls come in, so don't forget to submit the answers to your poll questions. And as we get started, one of the things that I'd like to say is this is a brief overview of 80-20. Typically, when we do 80-20 training, it's anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. So we're going to be going pretty quick. If you have questions, as Dave mentioned, chat them in, use the Q&A. Also, feel free to email us. We're more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So if we can see the poll results as they come up, so I can take a quick notes here. All right. So 60% of you said you spend about 20 to 50% of your time on non-impactful, non-value-added activities. We'll talk about that as we go through, but let's get started into 80-20. And again, this is a brief overview of 80-20. And where 80-20 really got started was not that long ago, but in the early 1900s by the man on the right here, Vilfredo Pareto. He was an Italian economist studying in Switzerland at the time. And he said, you know, there's a problem with my town. The problem is that 20% of the people own 80% of the land. My town is screwed up. And so he went to prove that by studying the next town over. And he found the same thing. And then he started studying other things. And no matter what he studied, he found that 20% of the input created 80% of the output. It's been this way forever. It will likely be this way forever. But 80-20 is basically 20% of anything, the 20% critical few input gets you 80% of the results. 80-20 works in my household too. I grew a beard with COVID, and I asked my family members, there's 5 of us, if they liked the beard, and 80% of them said, yes, please keep it. The less of your face we see, the better. So 80-20 applies at my house as well too. But Vilfredo Pareto said, you know what, this is the law of imbalance. And it is that way. Where did it get started in business? In business, it got started in the early 1980s with a company in Illinois, Illinois Tool Works, ITW, that started applying this process to the business. And it started with a man, John Nichols. And John Nichols had a hypothesis. He said, you know, we all know that 20% of the customers drive 80% of the revenue, and that 80% of the customers only drive 20%. He said, everybody knows that. We all know that. We've lived it. We've breathed it. But if I think about how much the 20% of customers that are driving 80% of the revenue, how much effort they take, I don't think it's proportionate to the revenue. He said, I believe it's more proportionate to their quantity. And so what he said is, I believe that 20% of the customers that are driving 80% of the revenue are only utilizing 20% of the overhead, 20% of the sales, marketing, all the SG&A costs, manufacturing overhead, things like that. That's where typically accountants misapply the spread of overhead, because typically they spread it either by revenue or machine hours or some other fictitious input that gets there. So he said this was my hypothesis, and over the next 30 years, he proved that this is a reality. This is what happens in your business. And so if you draw a line down the center, and I think we've got some animation there, he said, I wonder what the profitability above that line is. If all I had were 20% of my customers and 80% of my revenue, how profitable would my business be? And what he found was it is extremely profitable, extremely profitable. More than 100% of your profit comes from that. Conversely, below the line, if we look below the line, we've got 80% of our customers, and they're only driving 20% of the revenue. But yet they're taking up 80% of our time and effort. And so to get back to the poll, you know, what Pareto found was that the vast majority of everything we do is poorly executed, poorly conceived, and largely beside to the point to the customer they don't care. There are, however, a critical few things that we need to do. Those matter, and we don't spend enough time on them. So in our studies at Strategex, we find that people spend about 80% of their time on things that are non-value add. They're not adding a ton of value. And what's creating that is the complexity that businesses have in their customers and products. Now, before you start thinking that 80-20 is all about cutting customers and products, I want to focus on the key to success, the 80-20 key to success, and that is to treat them differently. We have to treat customers differently. We have to treat products differently. And what we like to say at Strategex is you guys are experts at this, you just don't know it. And so we'll launch into our second poll here. And the first question on the poll is, think about your partner, your spouse, your loved one. Think about their last birthday and select here all the things that you've done for them on their last birthday. You can check more than one. I know that for my wife's last birthday, it was gifts, it was dinner, we went to Wildfire, acts of service, things like that. But go ahead and fill out that poll. And then as you're doing that, now I want you to think about something else. Think about your siblings, your brothers and sisters. And if you scroll down, there's another multiple choice, and it's the same answers there. But start selecting what you did for them on their last birthday. Take a few minutes here, and hopefully it's not the exact same things that you've done. We'll give it a few more minutes as you fill out the poll. And let's go and see what the results are. We can pull up the results to the poll here. There we go. So when we look at it, I am concerned about some of you because you sent your loved one a text on their birthday, and hopefully you did multiple choice and it wasn't just a text. But look, gifts up there really high, the special date activity, a thoughtful letter, all of these things. And if we scroll down, and hopefully you guys can see these results as well, you know, a lot more weighted to the bottom. So you guys are experts at this in your personal life because you treat them differently. You treat your spouse differently than you treat your siblings. You treat your loved ones differently. In our world, that's because for me, my wife, Erica, she's an 80. So whatever it takes to make her happy is what I do. I've got 3 sisters. And you know what? They get a text. In fact, it's a group text. We're all on it so we don't forget anybody's birthday. So once one person hits happy birthday, the rest of the family also does it. Now, does that mean that we hate our siblings? No, it means we treat them differently. We treat them fairly, but not equally. And that's one of the things that's really hard for our clients to understand, because from the day we've been born, we've been taught, treat every customer like it's your only customer. Treat every product like it's your own product. No job too big or too small. And we're here to tell you that's simply not true. You have to treat them differently based on the value that they provide. So we need to treat them fairly, but not equally. So as we get started with 80-20, we like to say it's a data-driven process. Everything we do is driven by the data. We beat the data until it confesses. And where we start with that is actually a quartile analysis. And what we say is, with our clients, as we start working with them, give us a list of your clients in descending revenue, customer number 1, highest value at the top, customer number 1,000, lowest value at the bottom, and let's break it into 4 equal groups. So the top 250 customers, 25% of the customers, what percentage of the revenue do we typically see? And with the top 25% of the customers, it's going to be higher than 80% because 20% would be 80%. What we typically see is that you get 89% of your revenue from the top quartile. As you move down, the next 25% of customers, 7% of the revenue. And then the third quartile, this third 25% of customers, 3%. And then the last quartile, 1% of the revenue. We've seen this thousands of times. It's so consistent that on the back of our business card, I don't know if you can see it, the numbers 89731 are written there. We see this with every business, 89731. Well, that's interesting. most people don't realize that the bottom 50% of their customers are only driving 4%, but it gets more interesting as we move a column over to the right. And now we're going to talk about the percentage of cost or effort, overhead or effort, that it takes to service each quartile of customers. And this is not talking about material cost. That tracks pretty closely to revenue. This is all the overhead, SG&A, effort, and sometimes opportunity cost that goes into each. And when we ask this question, sometimes some people will say, well, it's the reverse. It's 13789, and we've never seen it that bad. But typically, it's spread equally. About 25% of our cost and effort goes into each quartile. And it makes sense because if you think about it at your company, when the phone rings at your business, what are your people trained to do? They're trained to answer the phone and provide great service to each and everybody. The phone doesn't ring differently if it's customer number 1 or customer number 1000. So this highlights a few problems, and most people jump to the obvious problem, and that is that we're spending 50% of our cost and effort on just 4% of our revenue. The bottom half of our quartile, 25% and 25% of our effort, 50% of our effort on just 4%. That's not the biggest problem that Carmelle and I see. The biggest problem that we see is that you're only spending 25% of your time, cost, and effort on roughly 90% of your revenue. And it gets even more interesting and more exasperated as we look to the last column, and that's what percentage of the profit comes from each quartile of customers. And when we do this live, we'll ask, and we get some audience participation, and Carmelle and I were working with a client, and they said, well, it's 89%. And we said, no, it's higher, and they went to 93% and then 94%. And eventually they got to 99.99999%. And what number couldn't they get above? What they couldn't get above was that 100%. But what we see is that typically you make at least 150% of your profit in this first quartile. It's 89% of your revenue and only 25% of your cost and effort. We've seen it as high as 300% of your profit. Well, now as we go to quartile 2, and what I like to say in quartile 2 is if you have an all-star team, you've got LeBron James and Steph Curry, James Harden, Kevin Durant, you've got an all-star team, you can maybe break even in quartile 2. And again, that's because it's 7% of the revenue and 25% of the effort. As we go down, you're losing money in quartile 3, and you're absolutely getting killed in quartile 4. You're losing money hand over fist. Now, people look at this and they say, you know, you're asking me to put all of my eggs in one basket. That's not what we're asking you to do. What we are telling you is your eggs are in one basket. You just don't know it. To give you an example, this is a recent client. We've sanitized the data. They're not exactly 89,731 on the customers. They're 93.7, 4.7, 1.2, and 0.3. So they're a little bit more top heavy. But one of the things that I like to point out, there's just a couple things on this slide. Their top customer was almost $16.5 million. And what a lot of our clients will tell us is we treat our top customer better. But when we look at it, we say, are you treating them 160 times better than customer number 350? Are we treating them differently to the magnitude that they deserve to be treated? Just a few other key points here. We find this rule of it's almost 50/50 or less than 5% of the customers are 50% of the revenue. You know, here for them, they're not an 80/20, they're at an 88. 8% of their customers were 80% of the revenue. And this is something that you can go and get this data within your company. If you struggle, feel free to reach out to us. We'll run the data for you and share it with you. But the same thing that's true for customers is also true for products. And when you look at this company, you know, huge complexity, 3,500 products. And yet only 90 were 50% of the sales and 460 were 80%. Now, one of the things I will tell you is that quartiles are tactical. They are not strategic. And the reason for that is one objection that does come up. And that objection is, what if my top customer, my highest value customer, wants to buy a low volume product? Am I going to tell one of my top customers no? And of course, we would never suggest that you do that. We've got to overserve our top customers. Conversely, Dave, what if customer number 1000 is buying one of my top products that I'm making anyway? Why wouldn't I sell it to him? And of course we would. And so what we say is this is tactical. It takes your temperature and lets you know you're sick. but it doesn't give you the diagnosis. So we have to move to something that's far more strategic, and that's what we call the quad chart. And the quad chart now takes the cross between the customer and the product. And one of the pitfalls as people try to implement 80-20 is they try to do it either on just the products or just the customers, and they forget that there's a relationship between the two. So the quad works on a pure 80-20 basis. And as we go through it, I'll go through this relatively quickly. Quad 1 is our top customers buying our top products. Quad 2 is our top customers buying those low volume products. Quad 3 is these small customers that are buying our top products, and then Quad 4 are these small customers buying the small products. And if you were to do the math, Quad 1 is going to be roughly 64% of the revenue, 0.8 times 0.8. Quads 2 and 3 are going to be roughly 16%, 0.8 times 0.2 and 0.2 times 0.8. And then Quad 4 is going to be roughly 4% of the revenue. 20% of the revenue times 20% of the revenue on the products, 4%. But that's where the vast majority of the complexity is. If we look at the effort and overhead to serve each quad, directionally, it's about equal, roughly 25% in each, which means that we're making all of our money in Quad 1. And so we call Quad 1 the fort. That's where all the gold is. And what we say is you've got to protect the fort. We've got to ensure that we're perfect in Quad 1. We've got to make sure that our manufacturing and our salespeople are so aligned around Quad 1 that customers would never think of buying from somebody else. Quad 2 is what we call the necessary evil. It's the stuff we don't really want to do, but we must do it because it's strategically important to those top customers. It can also provide stickiness. Quad 2 can keep a Quad 1 customer because they come to you for it all. So Quad 2 is the necessary evil. Quad 3 is what we call transactional. Today, it's probably losing a little bit of money to making a little bit of money, but we want this to be extremely transactional. We want this to go through a different channel of sales, either e-commerce, distribution, inside sales. We love that business, but we have to make sure that we're not spending a lot of time and resources on it. And then we go to Quad 4, and when we were trying to think of a name for that, what we knew all the time was you can't realize a profit in Quad 4, you can't realize a profit in Quad 4, and the acronym stuck. It is what we call CRAP. It's our low volume customers buying our low volume products. We can't realize a product here, and yet it's very complex. There's a lot of complexity in there. To put it into manufacturing terms, what I like to think about Quad 1 is this is our long run product that are relatively standard, sold to big customers. Long run in the operations. And if you're in operations, what do you want? You want long runs. You don't like changeovers. You don't like scrap and all the things that come from that. So long run, relatively standard. We know how to do it. We do it all the time. And it's to big customers. Quad 2 is short run products, somewhat specialized, but again, because it's to big customers, it's very strategic. Then we go to Quad 3, again, long run products, relatively standard. It's pretty much the same products as in Quad 1, but there's a lot of small customers. And so what we say in Quad 3 is this is a SG&A opportunity to reduce costs through things like that, through going through alternate channels. And then we go to Quad 4, and this is the one that all operations people hate because it's short run product, special, and it's to small customers. It's non-strategic, and yet it creates a lot of changeovers, a lot of quality issues, and a lot of energy and effort that's wasted. So as we move forward, I wanted to just show you another client example of a quad. And again, if you can get your quads, great. If you need help with them, Strategex would be more than happy to run these for you to show you your data. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I am going to highlight the differences between Quad 1 and Quad 4. If you look at Quad 1, relatively simple. There's 31 customers and 826 products. And for this, the revenue is roughly 56 million with a material margin of 32.5. Now I want you to go with me to Quad 4, this red quad in the bottom right-hand corner. And we've got 3,963 products and 300 customers. So we have 10 times the number of customers as Quad 1. We've got roughly 5 times the number of products, and yet we do it for 1/10 the material margin dollars. And so the question I'd like to pose to you is, which quad do you think is more profitable? If you were in operations, which quad would you like to run through your factory? And which quad do you think you're losing a lot of money on? And so just think about that. And then as you go back, and your homework from this webinar is to go get the data and see what the data tells you. Go get the data and beat it until it confesses. And if you have questions, we're here to help. So now as we transition, what do we do with this once we have it? And we're going to share with you what I call the magic formula, what we at Strategex call the magic formula. And it's something that's relatively easy to remember. Unfortunately, I'm an engineer by degree, or as my sisters lovingly refer to me, an engineer. And this isn't like the Laplace transforms that we had to memorize that use the English alphabet and the Greek alphabet. This one's a lot simpler. It only has 3 letters in it. And it's anything equals 0.8x plus 0.2y. And as you can see, it has our 2 favorite numbers in there. The 0.8x represents the critical few, the 20% of customers that are 80% of the value, the 20% that drives that value. And then we have the insignificant many, the 80% of customers that are only 20% of the revenue. And what we say is, if you use this formula, anything equals 0.8x plus 0.2y. And where we're going to start in a manufacturing application is actually with inventory. A lot of the clients that Carmelle and I and Strategex work with, we see they have far too much inventory on hand. And so one of our clients, they had about 4 months of inventory on hand. And we said, yeah, we know, and we can show you why. If you take your 80s, those high moving inventory items, you have roughly 4 months on hand of them because you treat everything relatively the same. And the 20s, the lots of products that you have in inventory, you also have 4 months on hand. And so sure enough, the math works out. 0.8 times 4, 3.2, plus 0.2 times 8, 0.8 gets you 4. So the formula works. You have 4 months on hand. From an 80-20 perspective, what we say is we want you to work on the critical few things that move the needle, the critical few things that matter. So what we say is, look, I want you to get really good at those 20% of items that are 80% of the value. And we only want you to have 1 month on hand for those. Now, I don't want you to spend all of your time on the thousands of items, so I'm going to let you get twice as bad on the insignificant many. I'll let you have 8 months on hand. You can get twice as bad at those, but we're going to get really good at the critical few. And let's see what the math says. 0.8 times 1 plus 0.2 times 8. And sure enough, 0.8 plus 1.6, you get to 2.4 months on hand of inventory. So what this formula says is you can get far worse at most everything you do. If you get really good at the critical few, you will see a huge improvement. And so we use this formula for inventory. We also use it in accounts receivable. You know, the worst way we've ever seen accounts receivable done is alphabetical, where they have the name of the clients and they go down the list in alphabetical order. An almost equally bad way is the way that most people do that, and that's by age of invoice. So they say we take our oldest invoices and we chase those down, and then we work on the oldest to the newest. And for us, we apply the magic formula. We say, no, the correct way to do it is to start with the biggest outstanding invoice and work your way from largest to smallest. And does the magic formula work here? Absolutely it does. One of the companies we were working with, they had 65 days sales outstanding, and yet their terms were 30 days. And when we looked at it, we said, well, here's how you got there. On the 80s, you had 65 days, and on the 20s, you had 65 days because you were doing it by age, not by dollar value. And so sure enough, when you do the math, 52 plus 13, anything equals 8x, 0.8x plus 0.2y, you got to 65 days. And what we said with them is, look, I want you to focus on the critical few invoices. And as soon as they go past 30 days, we want you working on those large ones, even if it means sending your accounts receivable to sit in the office of the accounts payable at your customers and driving them. And by doing that, we were able to get their accounts receivable for the 80 customers, the ones that had 80% of the spend, we got those to the terms to 30 days. So 0.8 plus 0.8 times 30, you get to 24. And now we said, I don't care about the rest. let those go to 95 days. And the math shows that you can get your AR way down through focusing and using this formula. Anything equals 0.8x plus 0.2y. It applies to on-time delivery. It applies to anything that you can think of. And that's why we call it the magic formula. And basically what it says is focus on the critical few, get really good at those. Don't worry about the rest. You can get worse at that and you'll be far better overall. 80-20 at the end of the day is all about focus. So use the magic formula. Now, as we talk about 80-20, one of the pushbacks we get is, we're going to do lean. And what we like to remind our clients is the first step in doing lean is to simplify, is actually to do 80-20. And so we took this chart, it's taken from this Champion Standard work, it's a participant workbook, it's actually a lean workbook, and it takes this concept of lean and ties 80-20 into it. So on the right, what we've got is a sigma overall yield versus sigma. And basically what sigma level does is it tells you what your defect per millions are. So if you're at a 3 sigma level, your defects per million are 67,000, which sounds like a big number, but it's less than 7%. If you're at 3 sigma, you get things right 93.3% of the time. If you move over a sigma level to 4 sigma, now you're only making 6,000 defects per million. 5 sigma, only 200 defects per million, and 6 sigma, only 3.4 defects per million. To give you an impact of how big jumping a sigma level is, one of the industries that's at 6 sigma is the airlines. Not in baggage handling, not in on-time departures, but in the part that I care about, I get on a plane alive, I get off the plane alive. To put it into perspective, if the airlines weren't at 6 sigma, if they were at 5 sigma, there would be a crash landing in the world every day, as opposed to now when it's a very rare occurrence and it almost never happens. So jumping a sigma level is extremely big. On the left hand, what we've got is a measure of complexity. You can read it, number of customers, number of products. In its genuine form, it's number of steps in the process. But on that left-hand column, that's a measure of complexity. And then all these percentages in the middle are what we call first pass yield. From the time you take the order to the time you ship it, how often do you get it right all the way through without making a correction? So now, the client that we were showing, they had 3,000 products, over 3,000 products, and most companies are at 3 sigma. So how often do you think they get things right the first time through? Well, the chart says their first pass yield, if you go down here, is 0. They've got 3,000 products, 3,000 steps. At 3 sigma, they never get anything right. Now, how big of a factor is first pass yield? Studies have shown that for every 20% increase in first pass yield, you get a 5% reduction in the cost of goods sold. So every 20% increase in first pass yield, you get a 5% reduction in cost of goods sold. Now, as I looked at the data, they had 24 products that were 50% of the revenue. So if we were to simplify and build cellular manufacturing, and we built 3 lines to handle 24 products, well, now we've simplified it and we've gone from 3,000 and we'd be up in this 10 range, which means our first pass yield would go to 50%. Said another way, we would get a 12.5% reduction in the cost of goods sold. And typically when people try to apply lean, what they say is, well, we're just gonna move a sigma level over. If you have 3,000 products and you work really, really hard and you move a sigma level over, you're still at a 0% first pass yield. And so what we say is, let's simplify first. Let's go north first with 80-20. And then how much easier is it to get to a higher sigma level once we've simplified? Some of our clients say we've got 3,000 products and we're just gonna move a sigma level, and we say good luck. But if all you had to worry about were 24 products, how easy would it move to move from 3 sigma to 4 sigma? Well, there's not that much to do. It's a lot easier. So what we say is go north with 80-20 and then go east with lean. And these are things that we do with our clients. We separate out the manufacturing, we segment it, we simplify it. Because we believe, as Einstein said, there's nothing as useless as getting as good at something you shouldn't be doing in the first place. So there's nothing as useless as getting really good at something you shouldn't be doing in the first place. And if you remember the quartiles, if you remember the quads, there's a whole bunch of complexity in quad 4 that we shouldn't be doing in the first place. So this is a brief overview of 80-20 and tie in with lean. And now we're going to go and Carmelle, I'm going to introduce to you Carmelle. Carmelle is a wonderful leader, a wonderful 80-20 practitioner. She's also a great friend of mine. She joined Strategex a year ago. We had been trying to hire her for since 2013, I believe, Carmelle, and finally she saw the folly of her ways and joined this team at Strategex. But Carmelle, welcome, and we've got some questions that came in prior to this session that I'd like to ask you, and we'll launch into the questions and answers after this. So, you know, one of the things I love about Carmelle is, despite being an excellent operator, she has a long history in finance as well. She's actually a CPA. And so one of the questions we got was, how do you apply 80-20 to accounting? So Carmelle, in your experience, what are some of the things you've done in accounting applying 80-20?
A couple things. First of all, you mentioned two great ones in your presentation, applying 80-20 to inventory and 80-20 to accounts receivable. That's a really good place to start. I also like to apply 80-20 to the chart of accounts. So when you look at a traditional chart of accounts, people tend to expand it as much as possible and measure a lot of things that don't really matter. And I try to make the chart of accounts smaller, cleaner, and only measure something that you're going to actually act on. So that's another way. A third way I would say would be putting together really good KPIs that are going to help you measure and understand your business, and just picking the critical few that are going to help drive the results that you want.
So following up on that, what are some of the KPIs that you would use to drive that, or what are some of the things that you would measure?
One of the things that we always measure for our clients at Strategex is the key ratio. This is a measure that I think was invented by Strategex. That basically, the numerator is the material margin, and the denominator is the total cost of the employees in the business, and that's everything to do with their salary, their benefits, their travel, everything. And you divide the number into it and come up with some kind of a rate. And what it does is it tells you how well are you leveraging your employee costs as you grow. So as the material margin grows, are you leveraging those costs? And if you look at the trend over time, it tells you a lot about your business. It could tell you if your business is profitable. It could tell you if your business is unprofitable. It could tell you if you're growing. It could tell you if you're stagnant. It could tell you if you need help. So we do that with every client. It's a really good measure to help you understand the health of your business. We also like to measure on time in full inventory. We call it ISOTIF, in spec, on time in full. We try to measure that 80 customers versus 20 customers. So we're really focusing the measurement to make sure we're maximizing the on-time delivery for the 80 customers before we even think about the 20 customers. And those two things I say every business should be measuring. And then if I were going to pick a third or a fourth, I would be very specific to the business that we were running. I ran a business that was very quality focused, so cost of quality was a really important measure. I have a client that sells a lot of aftermarket products. The margins on aftermarket need to be a certain level to drive the profitability. That might be something we track. So I would say pick 3, 4 at the most, but be really clean about making sure that they're going to be impactful.
Thank you. You know, another questions that keep coming in is, can you give us an impactful way in which you've used 80-20 in the factory? And so in your experience as you were running businesses, what are some of the things you would do in the factory applying 80-20?
It kind of goes back to the slide where you say treat them differently. So if you have, I had a factory where we sold product to a big manufacturer, and we were treating every order the same. Every order came in a FIFO way. We would set up the order as soon as we got the order. The lead times are very long. The on-time delivery was very bad. It was in the 60% range. And so one of the ways we applied 80-20 in this part of our factory is we looked at the data and we said which products are really driving 80% of the sales. And then we dedicated equipment to those 80 products. And it seems a little counterintuitive because we had, let's say, 5 lines that we could pick from, and we took the 4 of the lines and we ran the 80 on the 4 lines, and we dedicated those pieces of equipment. And then we ran everything else on the other lines. So we got much worse at the 20. The lead times got longer. but we got really good at getting the 80 on time. And so we went very quickly to shipping within 24 hours, on-time delivery nearly 100% on the 80. On the 20, we eventually got to on-time delivery 100%, but we gave them much longer lead times. We gave ourselves more time to set up and change over. And then from there, we just started optimizing the lines and getting better and better and better to the point where we could increase capacity. We could sell the capacity to more customers. It eventually added a lot of profit to the bottom line.
Great. So any words of wisdom, especially on supply chain strategy for 80/20 in a global environment where you've got to manage costs, risk, lead times, all of those things?
So I have a lot of clients right now that are going through supply chain problems with China boats coming over, being delayed, and whatever's happening in the Suez Canal. What we tell our clients is two things. First of all, make sure you're allocating the inventory to your 80 customers at the expense of even shutting off your 20 customers if that's what you have to do. So you're really overserving the 80 and they're not feeling the pain if you can help it. That's the first and foremost, but also it's kind of forcing some of my clients to go back and challenge themselves on why they've outsourced their 80 products. If you've got an 80 product that's critical to your 80 customers, you don't really want it to be made across the world. You really want it made in your backyard so you can control it and you can make sure you can react if you have things happen. So I say those two things are the most important. Allocate properly to the right customers, and then really make sure you have a strategy that allows you to manufacture products where you need them.
Great, thank you. So as we've gone through 80/20, sometimes it seems so simple. And so a common question that we've gotten, and it came through a number of times in this one, is what are some of the common pitfalls you see in 80/20 execution?
I think people, first of all, do a shift of, here's a list of customers, here's a list of products, and I'm going to draw the 80/20 line, and I'm just going to cut the bottom off. That is typically a mistake. Usually you have to do it a little bit more surgically than that, and you got to go through each thing and make some decisions that are smarter. So doing it too quickly, doing it without a lot of thought, that's a mistake. But also, I think the most often what I've seen is when it has failed is when the top leadership of the organization isn't fully committed to sticking it through. 80/20 is not a project. It is not a event. It is a complete culture transformational change of your business. And it's hard when you execute it because you bump up against, let's say a sales guy doesn't like not being able to sell to the customer the way they used to. They don't like to not be able to do the milk runs they used to do or whatever it is. And if they don't like it enough and they're complaining enough and then the top management supports them, the whole thing kind of falls apart. So to me, it's about doing it surgically, understanding really how to do it and executing it well, but making sure from the top of the organization down, everybody's committed to the effort.
What about when customers complain? One of the things clients tell us is, if I start treating them differently, I'm going to get a whole bunch of complaints. What would you say to that?
I would say, first of all, make sure the customers that are complaining are not your top customers. If it's an 80 customer, you want to be over-serving them to the point that they're talking about you to everyone they know and how great you are. And if you're doing that and you're separating your team to focus on them directly and they feel like they're getting treated the way they deserve to be treated, then you've solved half your problem. And then if you've got a whole bunch of other customers which you're taking away resources from and you're finding out different ways to work with them, they might be unhappy at first. It might be a difficult conversation, but first of all, you're not making money on those customers anyway, so you shouldn't get too hung up on it. But what I always try to do is communicate in a way so they understand that the lead times will be longer, the price will be higher, but you're going to still keep those promises. So eventually you're just going to retrain them. They're not going to be getting the immediate service they used to, but you're going to still do what you say you're going to do. But first and foremost, you're really treating your best customers at the expense of the other customers, and that you have to be okay with that, at least initially as you're kicking it off.
Excellent. So another common question we get is, how does 80/20 relate to a business system? Many companies, many clients are putting in what they call their business operating system, either similar to Danaher Business Systems or something like that. How does 80/20 relate to that, and any words of advice there?
I think 80/20 can work in conjunction with those systems. Like a lot of people, like Danaher Business System is something you mentioned that is really well thought of. The problem with it, and the way we kind of overlay 80/20 on top of it, is that it tends to be too detailed, too complex. You're measuring too many things. It takes too long to fill it out. So like anything else, you apply an 80/20 lens to it, where you say, of the things we're going to measure, let's pick the 5 most impactful things we're going to measure, and we're going to simplify down to that. So you might still use the format of the Danaher Business System, but you're doing it with far fewer things, far more focused. I mean, 80/20 is about picking the things that you need to worry about to run your business well, and then really focusing.
Excellent. So they're not really in contrast to each other. You see them as working together, and one actually more of the framework of thought, and the other more being the process to drive it. Is that
That's
kind
right.
of the way? Okay,
Yes.
great. So another question that we got coming in prior was, they're really interested, a lot of the people on the webinar are interested in what KPI should we define and how do we go about measuring them? And I know you mentioned ISO-TIF and the Strategex key ratio. Any other impactful ones, either on the manufacturing floor or in the office that you've used that can help our audience as they go forward?
You could measure productivity or cost per employee, or how long it takes to get a product through your factory, or the cycle time. I mean, it really depends on what's important for your product and for your business. But I would look at picking the fewest number of things that you can pick to measure to actually move the needle.
How many KPIs would you say per division or per business are really too many or too few? Because a lot of the clients that we go into, they give us their KPI list and they've got 100 things. So what's your guidance there?
4 to 5 at the most.
4 to 5 at the most.
At the most.
Great. Well, thank you. We're going to launch another poll now. And this poll is, I will tell you, there are no wrong answers. This is really about, what areas of your business do you think 80/20 can have a great impact? And again, there's no wrong answers, but for you, which of these are the greatest? When you think about 80/20, where does your company struggle? And where are some things where you can see some huge opportunities? So think about it. We gave you a brief overview, and we will have about 15 minutes of question and answer where Carmelle and I will stay on. And we're also available by email, by phone. Jackie, I don't know if you can put up our contact information on the slide there, but we're more than happy to share with you. One of the things that I love about the team at Strategex is we live 80/20 down to our shoes. Everything we do has an 80/20 perspective. My kids have learned about 80/20 with their toys. We Kanban our syrup and everything else. So we're more than happy to answer any questions, and our contact information is there. So let's see the results of the poll. And there we go. So all of the above, that's great. And a lot in production process improvements. We help our clients with that a lot. And again, we use the magic formula there. So, 80/20 will help you. And if you remember what Carmelle said, 80/20 is a way of thinking. It is not a check the box project. And so what we say is we like to give you an 80/20 lens in which to view your business.
One of the things I noticed on those poll results was that only 10% of you look at 80/20 as a way to grow revenue. It's often thought of as a cost reduction tool. And what you find is if you are actually focusing on your 80 customers with dedicated resources, you tend to be able to grow those customers significantly faster. And it's more impactful to grow a large customer than to have a bunch of little customers. So if you really do 80/20 well, it really does help you to grow your business really, really quickly. And I have a client that I've been working with for about 9 months, and they're up 40% on the top line. So it is dramatic what it can do if you put the right focus.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll get into some Q&A now. And as a reminder, if you have any questions, please send them in via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom application. We did get a handful in, so I'll start running through. So for the first one, when applying 80/20 to account management, is there evidence that segmentation really works? And what if you can't shed top line from the smaller guys?
Do you want to go, Carmelle, or do you want me to take that one?
You can take it.
All right, so yeah, there's lots of evidence that segmentation works. One of the, it's actually step 2 in the 80-20 process is how do we segment? And what segmentation really does is it allows you to focus on what's important. I'm working with a client now where there was a large opportunity. It's something that could go to 100 million. It's only 500,000 now. And part of the problem was because it was buried in the rest of the business, there wasn't enough focus on that. So what we said is we're going to take that out, we're going to focus on it, and we're going to resource it, maybe not at 100 million, but we're going to resource it such that we can get it to grow. Because oftentimes what happens is when everything's lumped together, we don't know what's important. We don't know what's profitable. Segmentation allows us to do that. Segmentation of customers also allows us to focus and treat those customers differently. We have to treat our top customers much better than our lower volume customers. And back to the KPIs, we say if you're not 80-20 in your KPI, if you don't have on-time delivery for your 80s versus your 20s, don't bother measuring it at all, because we've got to be perfect with those. So segmentation, we've seen it work in hundreds of businesses, and it's really key to driving focus, driving growth, and understanding what's really profitable in a business or not. Carmelle, anything to add there?
No, I just, in my experience, when you segment your businesses well and you put the right resources on it, they tend to grow a lot faster than if you left it all together and mixed up. Because a lot of times you don't even know what's good and what you want to grow and what you want to exit or do something differently with when it's all mixed together. So segmentation is a really critical early step in 80-20.
Excellent. Any perspective on applying 80-20 on engineering and research?
You got to take that one, David.
All right. So I'm an engineer by degree. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we teach in our 80-20 modules is, where do we spend our time? Are we focusing and engineering for 80s and more 80 types? Because I'm an engineer, which means there isn't a problem I've met that I don't want to solve. But all of them don't need to be solved. And part of it is, how do we apply our resources on that? And I was working with a client where we were actually focusing on engineering. It was a custom manufacturing, custom engineering solution. And they tracked their engineering hours. And we went back and we said, great, so you tracked it, and they put it in quads. And they said, see, we spend, roughly most of our time in quad 1 and a little bit in quad 2 and a little bit in quad 3. And when we added up the hours, we said, great, that's, like 8,000 hours, which means there's 4 engineers. So we went to the engineering department. We said, well, why do you have 12? And the reason they had 12 is, well, they never really tracked their time on the 20s because they were all just one-offs and hit and misses and things like that. And what we said is, no, look, for quad 1, we've got to focus our engineering resources there. And what we didn't say was get rid of the other 8. What we said is, we're going to take some of their time. We're going to get to market faster. We're going to focus on the few projects that matter for the few customers that matter. And we're able to grow faster, get products to market faster. And again, we view everything almost from the customer first. So what problems are we trying to solve? And what we really say with the 80-20 research is, we have to get to know our customers better than they know themselves. And the only way to do that is to spend time there. And so we have, R&D engineers actually living at their customers' facilities to learn the process better. Carmelle, anything to add there?
No, I think that was good.
All right. How does the 80-20 rule apply to made to stock versus made to order products?
I'll give you a good example with this in a business that I ran. We made everything to order, to stock. We made it to order because the shelf life of the product was short, 3 to 6 months. And the thought was that you couldn't make it to stock because then it'd be sitting on the shelf and it would go out of shelf life before you shipped it. So what we were able to prove with data is there's an 80-20 to everything, right? And when we looked at the 80-20, the 80 products actually turn constantly. People buy them all the time. And so they didn't ever really sit there long enough for that to be a problem. So we shifted our manufacturing to say, for the 80s, we're going to make only the 80 products to stock, and we're going to make the 20 products to order. And so when we did that, what happened was, instead of having a 2 or 3 or 4 week lead time on the 80 products, they were always in the inventory. So when the customer placed an order, we could immediately ship, and then we just replenish what they shipped yesterday. And the 20 products, the lead time was a little longer, but we set up the order when we got it and we didn't worry about stocking it. And so by doing that, we were able to reduce our total amount of inventory. We were able to improve our on-time delivery, and we were able to improve our profitability. So, you know, I always look for the 80, and I have a client right now that makes everything to order, and it's complex and it takes forever. So we're trying to find the commonality. What's the 80 that we can figure out how to make some parts of this to stock to shorten lead time and to improve? So I would say there's an 80 to everything, and you just got to figure out what that 80 is.
How does 80-20 help with determining the best new business opportunities?
Well, first of all, when you segment, you've got people focused on their segment, hyper focused on their segment, and it helps them really look at what parts of their business could grow faster and helps them resource that properly. So it really opens up, instead of the strategy being this big, huge, complicated thing, it becomes really simple for each segmented business. I mean, I have a client right now that you know, part of their business is really small, but it's in a very big growing market, and they resourced it for the first time ever with a full-time team, and it's just growing crazy fast. And, you know, if it was mixed in with everything else, you might not have seen all those opportunities in the market. So how you look at the markets, how you dig in, how you focus really opens up opportunities. I'm sure, David, you have a ton of examples with your clients.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. One of the things that we do when we work with clients is we filter out the bad opportunities first. And so we put filters in. And sometimes knowing what you're not going to do is the best thing to getting to what you want to do. A lot of 80-20 is understanding what are the characteristics of quad one, what's in the fort, and what other opportunities are out there like that. So what are these characteristics and how are we going to work on growing them? We have a target selling module that we teach where we say, how do we laser-like focus on a few key accounts that are going to drive a lot of revenue? And as Carmelle mentioned, you know, our clients are experiencing 27% growth in quad one existing customers. Mm-hmm. And then we layer on top of that customers that they don't have that they should have. And so we get a lot of growth there. A lot of it's data, looking at what our value proposition is and what customers match that value proposition as well. So then we've got trade focus and all other things that we teach to help determine those.
Excellent. Do you have any recommendations for different pricing strategies for different quadrants?
Yeah, absolutely. Pricing should be strategic by the quad. And so when we teach it, what we say is, look, quad one typically should be your lowest priced quad, right? It's your largest customers buying your largest volume. That's where the most price pressure is. However, when we look at quads, what we typically see is it's spread relatively even. We price everything the same. Or worse, what we're seeing a lot of times is we're actually charging less in quads 3 and 4 than we are in 1. And so we do give some margin guidance there. You know, one of the things I'll tell you is you almost can't raise the prices high enough in quad 4. Mm-hmm. You just can't raise them high enough, because if you go back to the example, I think we had, you know, 10 times the number of customers and 5 times the number of products and only 1/10 the material margin. You'd have to raise the pricing 10 times to make up for it and be equal to quad 1. So there is a strategic pricing by quad. The one thing I will tell you, and this is one of the biggest pitfalls, don't start anything in quad 2. Never start in quad 2. There carries a lot of risk because those are your largest customers. Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, just one more thing to add to what David said, don't think you have a once-a-year price increase for quad 4. You have a price increase for quad 4, and then if it sticks and people buy it at that higher price, then you raise the price again. You might raise it 4 times in 1 year, but you just keep going after it until you start losing some of those customers because you don't really want them.
How should we be applying 80-20 rule to prioritizing strategic initiatives related to leveraging operations?
I'll give you an example of a client I have right now, where they have, first of all, when we work with a client, we work in the beginning with understanding the quads, and we say, we really want you to get out of quad 4, and you get out of quad 4 lots of different ways. You could substitute products, or you could raise price, or you could increase lead times, or you just make it more difficult to buy. But they actually, you know, had kind of a hard time doing that because there was a lot of profitability in quad 4 in their minds. And What happened was they got a really big opportunity with their number one customer. It doubled the business. And for them to do that doubling of the business of their number one customer, which is really profitable, it drops a lot to the bottom line, they have to get out of quad 4 faster. So it forces you to leverage your manufacturing in a way that's going to make it work for your biggest business. You know, what I always did when I ran a company is I tried wherever possible to separate the 80 from the 20 in the factory. I'd have a different set of equipment for the 20, a different set of people working on the 20 than the 80. So you didn't have to compete for resources, because the worst mistake you can make is to cut into an 80 line for some yelling 20 customer that's complaining, and next thing you know, you've screwed up an 80 customer in the meantime, and you never want to put yourself in a position to do that.
How do you identify potential 80 customers when they start as a 20?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways. One of the things that's very interesting is they have the same characteristics as those in quad 1 or those in quartile 1. So the first part is, what are the characteristics? And then what we teach our clients is what customers don't you have that you wish you had? And how big are they? You know, typically what people say is, you know, we've got to treat everybody, because the the large customers didn't start out large, they started small and slowly work their way up. And what we found is 99% of the time that doesn't happen. It does happen, but very, very rarely. What's more common is we don't realize the opportunities that are there and focusing on the existing big opportunities that we have. And so, you know, you first have to identify what's my company's value proposition, what are the target characteristics, what are the characteristics of those in quad 1, and then how do I go and get those? But a lot of it is already there. We just haven't looked at it. We haven't spent enough time understanding.
The only thing I would add to that is that oftentimes you say, okay, well, I know this customer is going to be bigger if we focus on them, and you might want to pull out 2 or 3 customers that you want to call it a pseudo 80 while you're working on it. That's okay, as long as 2 things. 1, there's not very many of them, and 2 is you set in the beginning an ejection point where you say, if it doesn't hit $500,000 by this date, we're done calling it an 80 and we can treat it like a 20. Because if you don't do that, emotionally you get tied into it, and the next thing you know, you're still working on this thing 2 years later, and you don't want that. So if you're going to decide you're going to call something an 80 that is not mathematically an 80, make sure you have a clear strategy about either why you did it and how you're going to exit.
All right, and we're going to wrap up momentarily, but a question that came and I figured I'd save to the end. Any good book recommendations for people interested in learning more about 80-20 applications in business?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I'll give you the name of a book, and then for questions we didn't get to, we'll follow up and get you the answers to those, and also free to reach out. But, you know, a lot of people have asked us why we don't write a book, and, you know, first, the book recommendation, probably the best one written is the 80-20 Principle by Richard Koch, I believe it is. But the reason that we haven't written a book is because it isn't a standard playbook. Every engagement that we've done differently. Over the last 14 years, I've probably worked with 100 different companies. I've never applied 80-20 the same. And so there's the science of 80-20, and then there's the art of 80-20. And the art of 80-20 is really understanding what to do when, based on the market drivers, based on the profitability, based on the culture of the company. I'm a big believer that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so too often what happens is people try to implement 80-20 and forget about the culture and how we've got to bring that culture along. So there are a few books on there. There's another one, I think it's called Thinking Outside the Box or Thinking Inside the Box.
The One Thing.
What's that?
The One Thing.
Yeah, The One Thing is actually not an 80-20 book, but it's a great book because it tells you focus on one thing, and it does have a chapter on 80-20. So that's a great book to read. But please don't think that this is something you can read a book on and then apply. That's what we call running with scissors. It can be very dangerous. So.
Excellent. Well, good recommendations. And thank you again to David and Carmelle and to Strategex. To everyone on the line, thank you for joining us today. As a reminder, if you'd like CPE credits and the certificate, please take the survey, which will pop up in your browser after you exit the webinar. And thank you all for your time today. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.